Coming up on this episode.
That kind of stuff. You might hear it said as like arguing for the sake of arguing,
Yes.
or something like that. That real ill intention behind it, or creating conflict in order to achieve something, even though conflict wasn't necessarily the appropriate course of action. That's where it becomes ill intention.
In workshops, though, we really like to bring that to life for people to really get them to understand, what does that actually look like? What does it sound like? And most importantly, if I'm on the receiving end of that, what does that look like?
Yeah. And open and honest. Well, no, you're just being a, insert expletive here. There's
Probably useful just to pause and think, right, well, why are certain conversations at work so difficult in the first place? So what comes to mind to you? What's your immediate thought process there?
I think real simple, real easy.
Yeah.
Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it more than it is. Just focus on those two things, you'll be all right.
Yeah. And if people want to know and learn more about compassionate candour and how to achieve it, where do we go? What do we do?
Well, there's two routes. The first one, I guess, is you can read Kim Scott's book, which is called Radical Candor, which is a brilliant read and worth looking into. The other obvious thing you can do is talk to T2 about it.
Sure.
We will talk to you about Radical Candor.
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. For now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Bernice Casserly.
And me, Alex Mather.
So, Alex, what are we here to talk about today?
Well, we've got a great topic to speak about today. We're going to talk about, essentially difficult conversations.
Yes.
So, go on.
So, with difficult conversations, I think, why is that important? I mean, it's a hot topic, right?
But it's been a hot topic for as long as topics
Forever.
have been hot. I think it's one of those things in business that really stands out for people as those horrible murky waters where they don't really know what to do, what to say. They'd rather avoid it because it feels a bit awkward. It's a big topic. There's a lot to it, and I wish we could cover it all in one podcast, but we can't. So
no,
I think we'll maybe focus on just one element of it, right?
Yeah, and I think as well, giving people the opportunity to try and navigate and tackle those challenging conversations, but in a way that actually is productive, because there's a difference between avoiding a challenging conversation and just stepping into it and just seeing what happens. There's definitely a framework that we can explore. But I think before we even get into that opportunity to think, right, what do I actually do to manage that challenging conversation? It's probably useful just to pause and think, right, well, why are certain conversations at work so difficult in the first place? So what comes to mind to you? What's your immediate thought process there?
Well, I think it's all to do with the fact that when we are at work, we're within essentially our own tribe, aren't we? And the tribe is moving forward to try and achieve a common goal, as it always has done, and that is our most natural instinct in our brain to do that. A difficult conversation comes out when we've got to have some kind of conversation within that tribe with someone that may feel like, as a result of that conversation, they're being judged, and therefore our primitive brain sort of moves towards this idea of them being ostracized in some way, and therefore being ejected from the tribe. And so straight away we go on the defensive. And then weirdly, we ourselves go defensive with it because we're worried about putting someone on the defensive. So the whole thing just becomes this vicious circle, and we end up not wanting to do it or just avoiding it because, do you know what? Just the harmony of the tribe is more important.
Yes, and that's the reality for so many people. And you see it in teams as well. I mean, I can certainly think of even teams that we're working with and we're partnered with. You can almost see it in the room as well. If there's almost been situations in the past where actually it has felt like conflict, they go the opposite way to just try and soothe and soften things. But the reality is that the conversations that need to be had just aren't happening. And the reason for that is because they're avoiding having that conversation because they just want to keep the peace.
Yeah.
And the impact of that is what? If teams are avoiding difficult conversations.
Well, nothing changes. You know,
No.
the reason that you've got to have that conversation in the first place is because something has to change, because something has happened, which means someone needs to be made aware of that, and something needs to either change or be done differently, or they just need to be aware of it so it doesn't happen in the future. Well, if we're not having them, then nothing changes, and you just carry on as before, right?
Yeah, that's it. And we know in teams especially that kind of healthy, honest and open conversation is critical. It's really important, especially when you're looking at a senior executive team. Just yesterday I was working with quite a newly formed senior leadership team, and the conversations they were having were around meetings shouldn't be boring. We need to be able to have honesty. We need to have lively, productive conversations. However, sometimes for some individuals, it's a case of actually that feels uncomfortable to me because that does feel like conflict. And Patrick Lencioni was someone who we very much kind of advocate for his work around the 5 dysfunctions of a team. He talks about the conflict continuum, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
So the conflict continuum, what does that exist of? What are we looking at when it comes to that continuum?
Yeah, so the conflict continuum, it exists on this idea that teams generally operate within a scale, if you like, at which there are two ends. The first is artificial harmony. So this is the idea that, you know, harmony is created out of this this falsehood, if you like, or it's pretend harmony. Everyone's a little bit annoyed and a little bit aggrieved, but no one's going to say anything because everyone's just going to be a little bit sort of brighter because we're just trying to keep the peace and all that kind of stuff. The other end of that scale is you've got ill-intentioned conflict, and that's a real key element of the conflict continuum. In that, what Lencioni is saying there is that some conflict is good. You need a little bit of conflict in terms of people with opposing views and not agreeing on everything all the time. You don't want things to happen in a vacuum, so that's important. When the conflict becomes ill-intentioned in terms of you know, people effectively actively fighting each other. I don't mean physically fighting, but, you know, fighting each other in terms of arguments and that kind of stuff. You might hear it said as like arguing for the sake of arguing or something like that. That real ill intention behind it, or creating conflict in order to achieve something, even though conflict wasn't necessarily the appropriate course of action. That's where it becomes ill intentioned. So you've got the two opposite sides of this scale. And what Lencioni says is that we should be probably somewhere in the middle, probably more towards the conflict side of that than the artificial side of it. Now, that's not to say that you're advocating for moving away from harmony. You're moving away from artificial harmony, but what you're striving for is natural harmony, which exists in that sort of middle space between it. Natural harmony with a view to have that open, honest conversation. You mentioned before as well about, you know, it's really important for teams to have open, honest conversations with one another. And I wonder if sometimes some people in some teams confuse that with just wanting to say what they want, how they want, when they want. Saying, I'm just being open and honest. Well, no, you're just being insert expletive here. There is I think a huge difference between an open and honest and constructive conversation compared to one that is blunt and aggressive and unnecessary.
Yes.
And that's, again, where you start to drift into ill-intentioned conflict instead.
Yeah, and I think if you're at ill-intentioned conflict, then that's a huge sign of a lack of trust within a team, within an organisation. I mean, that's an entire day's workshop in itself, right? It's been kind of, that has been a hot topic for a lot of the workshops that we've been delivering recently. But also that artificial harmony could be a sign of a lack of trust as well, because that's almost the fear to speak up or the fear to have the conversation with a lack of understanding of, I don't know how that's going to be perceived, or I don't feel even safe to have that open and honest conversation, even though I know that it's something that needs to be said. So sometimes in the past we've referred to that artificial harmony as, it's quite cold in a sense because it's quiet, but it's passive aggressive at times. Whereas the ill-intentioned, that's hot and spicy and fiery, and you see it and feel exactly what's coming in.
It's the smoke that kills you in the fire.
Yes,
is what artificial harmony is. You know, you don't necessarily see it or anything, but it sort of it gets inside your team and slowly sort of deteriorates your team. Artificial harmony, and then you've got the other end, which is the which is the fire.
Yeah, you
essentially.
know what everyone's
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah.
It's just, whew.
Yeah.
Okay, that didn't feel very nice.
Yeah.
And this leads us quite nicely into a framework that we talk about a lot, right?
Yeah, we do. So Kim Scott's Radical Candor framework. So Kim Scott was an executive with Google, Apple, places like that, big firms. And she sort of went about trying to figure out how do you get the most out of these conversations? Because ultimately, when you're having a difficult conversation, when you're presenting someone with a challenge in a difficult conversation, you're trying to get them to change their behavior or take some action or you want something to be different afterwards. And what she discovered through studying this a little bit is that there's actually two real important component parts of that conversation that need to be there in order for it to be effective. So the first one of those was to actually care for the person. So care personally for them, care about who they are, what they are, why they're there doing it, and care about their own development. Like care about the fact that I want them to be the best version of themselves and to achieve everything they can achieve. You've got to have that scaled up because otherwise people recognize the fact that, you know, you'll hear people say that I'm not important here or I'm just a number or something like that. It's really hard to motivate those people to take action when they feel like that.
It needs to be genuine, and that's sometimes the language as well.
Yeah.
Genuine care personally for the other human being as
Absolutely.
well. It needs to be honest and true.
Yeah, 100%. And the other side of this that goes alongside that caring personally is a willingness to challenge them directly, not go around the houses with it, but directly say, look, this is not what we're looking for. We need something like this. This was all right, but this wasn't, and this needs to be better. We've got to have that willingness to be able to want to challenge them again in this case of making their output more effective. And when you combine the two things, well, you get this wonderful thing called compassionate candor. She used to refer to that as radical candor itself, but changed it more recently. If you look at some of Kim Scott's old stuff, specifically if you buy her book is called Radical Candor. But she's since updated that and now talks about it along the lines of it being compassionate candor, when you've got high levels of both caring personally, challenging directly. She's gone with that idea of it being compassion because this thought of it being a radical intervention is sometimes misconstrued. People can take that to mean that it's okay for them to be blunt or aggressive.
That's a big word to
the
some
point.
people.
Yeah, it is. It also might mean that it's a huge change and a huge shift. You know, to do something radical means to do something very, very different. And for some people, some teams, some organisations, they're not that far away from achieving it. It's only a minor tweak that will get them into this radical kind of space. So she changed it, and I think quite appropriately, to compassionate candor. But I guess that's the important bit to get right, is high care, high challenge, brilliant. But it's what happens when you've got a deficiency in those two areas that's the really interesting and probably destructive part.
Yeah, because what Kim Scott does is she then takes those two key factors, so that care personally and your ability to challenge directly, and you can put it into a full box quadrant, can't you? In workshops though, we really like to bring that to life for people to really get them to understand, what does that actually look like, what does it sound like, and most importantly, if I'm on the receiving end of that, what does that look like? If we were to jump into that framework and the quadrant, then where should we go first? Should we go for like a low level of genuine care but a high level of challenge?
Oh yes.
So what does that look like?
These are the lovely people in business that say stuff like, I'm here to work, not to make friends. Stuff like that, really sort of blunt to the point. You're going to get it right between the eyes with them. So she calls this obnoxious aggression, which is exactly what it is when you look at defining it. You know, people that don't see the people that they work with as other people. They see them as resources, and that they're happy to speak to them in a way that they think will get results. And very often that will show itself as this aggressive, obnoxious language. And people react to that. The problem with that is people react to that usually from a threat state, Now, we've got other podcasts on mindset types and threat state and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, all we need to know here is that people are not operating at their most effective when they're in threat state. No. We know that. And so you get this reaction. You get that primitive part of the brain that reacts to that obnoxious aggression in a threat state. And you don't get the most out of people from it. You end up with people reacting to that. And that primitive part of the brain is looking then at things like survival and that kind of stuff. You want them to take on more information in that scenario? Probably not going to happen, because all their primitive brain is concentrating on doing is, how do I deal with what's right in front of me in the present time, which is this idiot shouting at me, something along those lines. So, yeah, it's not a great place to be. I think most of us have experienced it one time or another. Some of us have done it. I know I have. Like, I know when I was sort of much younger and sort of going through those sort of those leadership transitions you go through on your journey, and I decided at one point that I've got to just tell people what they've got to do and that kind of stuff. And I don't care about what they say about X, Y, Z. They just got to do it. And what I hope is that you should learn pretty quick that that's not the most effective way.
No.
And the problem with it mainly, and the tragedy with obnoxious aggression is that in our workshops we talk about quite extreme examples of what obnoxious aggression can look like. I actually think the most dangerous form of it is the dialed back version of obnoxious aggression, where it's not quite so obvious. And what you end up with is some people that they don't react to it outwardly. As I said, they're in threat state. They're definitely reacting inwardly about it, but they don't react to it outwardly. And it goes on, and all we do is we just reinforce the behaviour that it's okay for that leader to be obnoxiously aggressive.
They're just direct.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's just how I am, that kind of thing. And eventually people just get sick of it, and then they leave. They do two things: they either snap or they walk out. And sometimes they do both. They snap, and therefore they have to walk out.
Yeah.
So yeah, really dangerous place to be. Obnoxious aggression.
And you made a good point there, Alex, around potentially what's going on for that leader if they are demonstrating and displaying obnoxious aggression. The likelihood is they're in threat state themselves. And it's almost like that kind of fight or flight. It's the fight mode that's kicked in. But the reality is the person receiving that, their fight or flight is going to be triggered as well. So are they now going to retreat and avoid speaking up for themselves, or it's met with, it just turns into a defensive.
Match, yeah. Or do they freeze? They don't know what to say, and then
that's it.
And then they beat themselves up afterwards because these are the people that go away going, "Oh, I should have said this and I should have done that," and because you're in that threat state, heat of the moment, your primitive brain is fully active. Point.
So it's definitely it's not productive, can disengage. It can be seen as almost overly assertive as well. So it might potentially scare people and drive results in the moment, but long term you're not going to sustain anything.
No, it's a very finite existence.
Definitely. If you were to reverse that then, so we've just spoken about high challenge, low care. Yeah. So what does high care, low challenge look like?
So this is what Kim Scott refers to as ruinous empathy. So ruinous empathy, this idea where you care so much about the person that you don't want to cause any kind of conflict or any kind of issues for them. Essentially, you don't want to upset them in any way. So you don't bring it up. You don't talk about it. You skirt around it. You'll hear people use terms like going around the houses with stuff and that kind of thing. And ruinous empathy is strong wording, but it's strong wording for a reason. Very much like the conflict continuum. There's no worse or better end of that to be at. This is the same thing. Obnoxious aggression is not worse than ruinous empathy. And ruinous empathy is not worse than obnoxious aggression. They are both hugely ineffective. The reason it's termed as ruinous empathy rather than just empathy is because of the ruinous nature of both that conversation and the onward development of the person. So firstly, the conversation is about change. The conversation is about something having to change or some action having to be taken after the conversation. Well, if you go into it with this level of care, huge caring personally, with no direct challenge, we just ruin the conversation.
Yeah.
You won't get what you want out of it. But also it's ruinous in the eyes of the development of the person as well. Don't forget, as leaders, one of the parts of being a leader is to develop your people. That's hugely important. Helping your people to become as happy and effective as they possibly can be. by not highlighting to them the ways in which they can be better, more effective, do things differently, you're stifling their opportunity to be able to do that and to be that.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is ruinous for them and their development. So it's a really, really serious problem, that. But it doesn't feel like it because they're lovely, warm people that all they want to do is just put their hands around people and say, oh, it'll be okay, I don't want to offend you, and that kind of stuff. And people come out of those conversations going, oh, yeah, they were really nice to me and da-da-da-da. But because there's no challenge, there's no, okay, but what now? What do we do? There's no inspiration there.
No, the intense positive, it's a case of actually, you know what, I really like you, so therefore I'm not going to say that because I don't want to rock the boat. And I know you've been really busy lately, Alex, and I know how stressed you've been, so... Yeah, I'm not going to mention that thing that we need to talk about because, you're just so... I care so much for you. It actually is incredibly productive because, as you say, that you're never going to learn. You're never going to be able to grow from that. And so what that looks like in teams is that the team members view each other as incredibly knowledgeable or credible in their own specific, like, field or department. Yeah. But because the respect and sometimes the rapport so high, it's a case of, well, that's not my place to say. I trust so much in your knowledge and your expertise. I'm not going to challenge that. But actually, again, coming back to that senior leadership team, it's critical that you do because 100%. You have an alternative perspective. So we've got obnoxious aggression, which is big, it's loud and disruptive. Ruinous empathy is, I care so much. You know what? I'm not going to say anything right now, but I'm doing you a disservice by not saying that. Yeah. So if we then take a look at what Kim Scott says is actually probably one of the worst places to be in all of this, which is your low care and low challenge. So what does that look like?
Manipulative insincerity.
Which... I don't tell me, you probably can relate to this. Yeah. Whenever we introduce it to either an individual, if it's one-to-one or a group of people, just hearing those words, you see like the energy shift in the room. Yeah.
And she doesn't mince her words, Kim Scott, right?
No.
She calls it for what it is, for sure. And it's, manipulative insincerity. Again, manipulative on a couple of different sides, but really what she's talking about there is... people don't really care about you as a person. They're not really bothered what you do or how you do it. You are just a resource, and they could challenge you, but they're not going to challenge you all the time. Why would they? What you tend to see with people that operate with manipulative insincerity is that the only time in which they will challenge is when they want something themselves out of it. And this is where the manipulation then comes in. So this is where you start finding things like false empathy and that kind of jazz. So them pretending to care about you and your dog and your sick mother and all that kind of stuff. They pretend to be focused on figures and numbers to get something from you. Now, what they also might do is use tricks around language and words just to plant seeds and that kind of stuff in your head, just to see if anything comes from it, try and get you on side. But I think there's a general apathy from them towards actually doing anything for you and your development. Ultimately, it's about getting the result, and that's it. Really, really dangerous place to be, because as you all know, as I know, as anyone that's experienced will know, when someone starts to do that, when you recognise it for what it is, for the insincerity that it comes with, well, that just ruins a relationship straight away.
Yes.
And then that lack of trust, that disappearance of trust as a result, well, that takes a long time to get that back in there. So I think that's why Kim Scott really focuses on that being probably the worst.
It can lead to a real toxic environment if there's that lack of care, but lack of challenge. That is... it could be in a situation saying to someone, you know what, one-to-one, you're fine, everything's all good, no feedback for you, but I'm having a right nightmare with Ella at the moment. Oh my goodness, she's not. I've got all of these things going on, I've got all of these problems, don't worry, you're okay. But in that moment, that person might be sat there and you might be sat there thinking, okay, but I'm not sure if you should be having that conversation with me, or actually I'm not sure if that leads to a mistrust, because you're saying the feedback that you need to be having with Ella, but then you're saying I'm okay, and you're not feeding.
So what are you saying about me behind my back?
What do you say about me behind my back?
Yeah.
So this is where Kim Scott says it can really create a toxic environment because it leads to confusion and alarm bells and anxiety start to ring through as well. And sometimes it can just be that feedback that just leaves you with questions after. And you're thinking, right, okay, where was that coming from? What was the purpose of that conversation?
And the other side of this manipulative insincerity exists around that same person that was telling you about Ella and how not very good at X, Y, Z, then goes out the room and sees Ella and goes, "Oh, you're doing a great job, Ella. I love what you're doing." All that kind of stuff.
Now I'm even more confused, thinking,
What?
hang on a minute, you just said to me the X, Y, and Z. And that's then where you as my leader, I'm looking at you and thinking, I'm not too sure about you. There's a definite lack of trust there because
And the problem with operating
it's manipulative.
there, and I think the problem with operating in that space is that eventually it gets found out. You know,
Yes.
for those of us that have worked in places or with people that are like that, eventually the wheels come off and you see the people for what they are in terms of the fact they're doing that. They're saying one thing to one person, another thing to another person. And as I said before, it destroys trust, it destroys harmony. Ultimately, it ruins teams when you've got people like that. Not just the leaders, but just the people within teams behaving like that. That toxicity that is created from that is really, really damaging for a team.
Because then it breeds and grows. So in that situation, I'm now having a conversation with someone else saying, what's going on with Ella? Yeah. And that person then has another conversation and it just breeds into a really toxic, negative environment. So with that, would you also say that the manipulative insincerity is potentially also threat state behaviour as well? It's not coming from a positive place.
I think if I'm being honest, I think all three of them are threat state.
Yes, yes,
I
definitely.
think that ruinous empathy represents as threat state because you're concerned about the fear of that friction or the issues that might be caused or causing the conflict. The obnoxious aggression comes from threat state in terms of you're worried about what the outcome of X is on you, and therefore you're taking really firm, almost fighting action to try and resolve it. Manipulative insincerity is threat state. It's just a more sinister way of doing it in terms of trying to get results. But what we can sort of conclude from that model, if you like, is that all three of them are really terrible places to be. And it's essentially compassionate candor is what we need to look at. Now, you can't fake caring personally. You can't think, right, I've got to be compassionate candor. I just got to care personally.
How do I show that I care about you?
Just
this is why she uses the word genuine.
Yes, it's got to be genuine. You've got to find that genuine empathy within you and actually care about who these people are, what they're doing, and how they're developing within your team. And then you've got to have that motivation and that willingness to challenge them directly. And far better to have a slightly awkward conversation with someone for 2 minutes rather than have this toxicity that you just spoke about spread through your team over a period of time and therefore destroy it. I'll take the 2 minutes, thanks.
Yes, that's it. So with the compassionate candor, and I think this is why it's such a great model, because it's that ability to pause, sit down, and so important when it comes to your preparation for a difficult conversation. If you're just stepping into it and you've not even thought about it, then you need to kind of press hold, put the brakes on there, because a difficult, challenging conversation, and in order to show that genuine care personally, you need to think about how you're going to position it, how you're going to kind of structure that. Also taking into consideration what's going on for that person in that moment in time, what's happening from their perspective. But when I'm sitting down and having that opportunity to think about it, okay, so how will I show genuine care personally for that other person? And actually, what do I need to do for myself or for them in order to challenge directly? That's simple and easy to remember, right? Just those two things.
I think real simple, real easy. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it more than it is. Just focus on those two things, you'll be all right.
Yeah. And if people want to know and learn more about compassionate candor and how to achieve it, where do we go? What do we do?
Well, there's two routes. The first one, I guess, is you can read Kim Scott's book, which is called Radical Candor, which is a brilliant read and worth looking into. The other obvious thing you can do is talk to T2 about it. You know, we will talk to you about Radical Candor the Radical Candor framework, compassionate candor, amongst many other communication strategies and techniques and pathways, you just got to reach out to us.
Definitely. Good podcast, and I'm surprised we've been able to stick to kind of try and keep it nice and short as well, because this really is a topic that's so vital and so important for every individual, every leader, every team, every organisation. But it really is one that, as leaders, we have to take the time to really put genuine thought and process into actually how do we show and demonstrate compassionate candor throughout the workplace in every conversation. That's difficult in itself, right?
And a big conversation, again, off the back of that. So somehow we've managed to cram it into 30 minutes.
I know.
But I don't think it's the last time we'll be talking
Definitely not. So, yeah, as Alex said, there's loads of resources that you can explore and that you can find not only on the T2 Hub, but definitely externally as well. We'll be more than happy to support with any of the difficult conversations that are potentially happening or not happening in your organisation. So, Alex, thank you for giving us that insight into compassionate candor.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll be back soon for another People Performance podcast.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.